back to Secret Weapons, and today we're taking a look at the first in a very, very impressive new line from Walrus Audio, the Mako Series D1 Stereo Delay. This wild new 2020 offering from Walrus Audio not only marks what I believe to be the kickoff of a new line of pedals from them, but also a huge move in the world of big box delays, mostly because look how small this box is. You have basically all the features you would want out of most of your big box delays on the market, but in this tiny, tiny setup that is feature rich to a crazy extent. You have your stereo in and outs, both sides. You have your MIDI in and your MIDI through, which is actual proper 5-pin. I don't know how this is fitting on here. You have 5 algorithms in here, which kind of, depending on how you use it, I am of the opinion it counts as more than 5, but we'll get into that later. You have your basic stuff like your time, your repeats, and your mix. You have this tweak control over here, which allows you to adjust the modulation, the tone, and the age, also algorithm specific. You have your presets and you have your subdivisions, and then you have this attack knob over here, which I think is the standout feature on this thing and does some stuff that I wish that other delay pedals could do but do not, and it makes this amazing. So before we hammer down on the attack knob too much, let's go through what I feel are the standout modes on this thing, my standout choices that I find myself going to a lot. Number 1, the digital delay on this thing is crisp and warm and awesome, and the age control on it is a bit crusher, which ties in really well with the tone control to create very, very cool, murky, broken speakers sounding repeats that just sound really cool. It's dope, trust me. Number 2, and I think that this is the most impressive thing about this pedal, I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it is, the vintage mode on here. You'll notice that this pedal doesn't really have a tape mode or an analog delay mode, which feels like they should be staples of the genre. But this vintage mode, when you go to your tone control, right at noon, you have a perfectly flat response, and as you dial it to the left, you start introducing a low pass that really gives it a very dark analog tone, which ties in really well with the modulation algorithm. But when you push it up past noon, it starts to introduce a high pass that gives it a very, very distinct tape delay sound. And they're both amazing. It's one algorithm, and yet the tape sound and the analog sound are so good. They're so good. The dual delay mode on this thing is great. Depending on your subdivision over here, it gives you a different combination of subdivisions on the left side and on the right side. The manual will run through them. All I know is I am a sucker for the dotted eighth mode, which I believe is a quarter note on one side and a dotted eighth on the other, so you kind of get that like U2-y the edge, where the streets have no name but on both sides of your head. But make no mistake, the dual delay on this thing isn't just like a throwaway mode that happens to be stereo. The character that you can pull out of it with the modulation, the tone, and the age control on this thing is great. We'll dive into that specifically in a few minutes, but I find that when I play live, I go to that dual mode nearly constantly. It just feels so rhythmic and so cool. It's really good. And finally, the original standout, the original thing that made me fall in love with this pedal during the initial push and when I played it at NAMM is the reverse mode. The reverse mode on this thing is amazing. The tweak controls on it can give you these nice crisp responses or these like really lo-fi, torn apart, very like warbly reverse delay moments that are just, they're cool. They're very analog reverse delay kind of thing. They're great. But what makes this so impressive is the fact that you've got your MIDI control, which allows you to lock your clock into your reverse delay so you can make it feel very rhythmic and very predictable. And then you can take it an extra step further, which is the attack knob right here. When you have this at 0, all of your delay taps, all of your delay lines that come back with all of your pick attack and everything. But as you dial it up, it's kind of like a ducking feature, but on every repeat, and it can get pretty intense, which is awesome. But the reason it's so cool is because on that reverse mode, it doesn't duck the front half of your signal, it ducks the front half of that sample before it gets reversed, which means the end of that kind of rising reverse delay trail can have it taper off at the end, which really gives you like a smoother reverse delay and gets rid of those big like cliff sounding repeats, which is really great, especially really great for when you're doing kind of like volume swell soundscapey stuff and you just want those swirling reverse delays, but you want them to kind of lack that decisiveness that you often get with them. That attack mode also translates into all these other delay modes really well, by the way. The dual delay mode, and we'll dive into this a little bit, with the attack dialed way down and your time really, really long, can create these really cool, almost moments of reverb that bounce back and forth. When you really take out that pick attack on your repeats and kind of drench it in some reverb, it just creates really cool stereo kind of movements back and forth, especially with the different subdivisions. It's really dope. I'm doing this a lot, by the way. I apologize. So last weekend I played live and I used this as my only delay, which was mildly terrifying because I tend to run at least 2 delays on any given board. Usually like 2 big box delays like the GFI, Specular Tempest, or the Empress Echo System. I tend to put a lot of delay on a board. And I was shocked. This thing handled everything I needed it to incredibly well. The sounds on this thing are just great. I say this in almost every video though, and that's no pedal is without its flaws. And this is no exception, which I think I also say in almost every single video. So let's talk about a couple of things that I'm not wild about with this pedal. Oh, but before I do, the one final thing I want to say that I love about this, preset management on this is amazing. It's so easy to just pull up your preset on your MIDI controller. I use the Morningstar. Pre-pick what preset you want to be on, dial everything in, and then just press and hold these 2 together, and you've immediately got it saved. I had to make some like last minute changes when my amp and my wet rig went down and I had to go down to a stereo rig. It was so easy and so quick for me to reset the mix control on all my presets and save them all incredibly fast. Really convenient, really intuitive. Preset management on this thing with a MIDI controller is phenomenal. I think that's largely due to the fact that you don't have a lot of menu diving to do here. You technically have no menu diving to do here, but you know, the ecosystem is amazing. It has no menu, but it also has 1,000 features and 1,000 parameters you have to keep tabs on. Meanwhile, like the GFI stuff, you have a screen. The timeline stuff, you have a screen. You need to really dig around if you're gonna make changes to a preset on the fly, and it can be a little bit daunting. This, I didn't feel worried about it, which is great. But yeah, so let's talk about how this thing is not a perfect delay either. One very weird quirk about this pedal is if you have it run mono in, stereo out, and you have it in true bypass mode, when the pedal is bypassed, you're only going to get left in and left out, which is a little weird. So you have to set it up for buffered mode or relay bypass or whatever it's called. And then you'll properly pass your stereo signal all the way through. So just be aware of that. It feels a little quirky, but once you change the settings, you're fine. Number 2, and this one's a little bit weirder, which is all of the delay modes on this, with the exception of the dual delay mode, are, I believe, technically mono delay lines with stereo modulation, which means when you switch over to your modulation here and you increase that, you will get a little bit of warble back and forth, but you're not going to get ping-pongy back and forth delays on any mode except for the dual delay mode. The dual delay mode, as you will hear, and as I think you heard on the intro, does have a really wide delay, has a very, very big stereo field. I'm doing this again. But the rest of the modes sit pretty close to center, and like I said, kind of only start to drift back and forth through your stereo field when you increase that modulation. As a result, I use the dual delay mode a lot, which, like I said, is why I'm so glad that the modulation, tone, and age controls on that dual delay mode are so dialed and so powerful, because that's very often my main delay mode on this thing. But I will say, look, when I was using it live, I did enjoy the fact that I could switch between mono delay lines and stereo delay lines based on songs and parts and that kind of thing. So it's a little bit of a give and take, but even with that being said, I ran this all weekend as my only delay, and I used that dual mode and it was great. And I switched over to the vintage mode when I wanted something that was a little more like that punchy rhythmic thing, because it sits right behind my guitar, which is really nice. But yeah, I wasn't bummed out using that live, even though I was a little worried about not having those stereo delay modes across the entire board here. Like I said, be aware, it's a factor there. So with that being said, I do see this still living on a lot of my boards moving forward, stereo and otherwise. Having said that, anytime I build a mono rig moving forward, I can say with pretty high confidence that this is probably going to be my go-to delay, especially when I only need a mono board and I want to run one delay. This thing can do so much, and it just does it well. I just feel like the modes on this thing are dialed. I feel like the algorithms sound really, really good. I feel like this mic is drifting down. There we go. Even with all that being said, like I said, I was very happy with how it felt over the weekend. I really felt like it worked well in a stereo rig, but I can say with total confidence that this would be my go-to delay for mono guitar rigs moving forward, especially mono, especially if I'm only running one delay pedal. This thing does so much and it does it so well. The modes on this are just dialed. The vintage mode, it seriously is like one of my favorite digital recreations of an analog delay and one of my favorite digital recreations of a tape delay in the same algorithm. It's just, the sounds are great here. This thing is 100% worth your time. It's compact, it's easy to use, and like I said, I'm really into the sounds on this thing. I just think they're well designed. So I'm gonna stop rambling. We're gonna go to the board view now, and we're just gonna listen to some of my favorite quick thrown together sounds on this thing. I don't want to go through every single knob tweaky thing. I'm just going to kind of showcase some of my standout stuff. So hope you enjoy. Yeah, let's give it a listen. So what I want to do now is basically run through some of my favorite nuances of this pedal. Rather than just going mode by mode, I want to kind of highlight certain things like the ability to take the vintage delay mode and turn it into either an analog sounding delay or a tape sounding delay based on how you set the tone control, and the bit crushing and the really lo-fi reverse delay and that kind of thing. So that's the stuff we're going to focus on right now. But before we jump into that, let's listen to our dry tone. We are playing the Harmony Silhouette into a diamond compressor, brown protein, Benson preamp, the Walrus Audio Julia into the Walrus Audio D1 Delay, the Mercury 7, the New Neighbor Immerse, and the Strymon Iridium. So let's hear how that sounds. Then let's start with a dual delay in stereo. One of the things that's really dope on this pedal is finding that right balance between the bit crush and the tone control in the digital delay mode. So we'll start with a nice clean digital delay, and then we'll start to kind of reduce that sample rate and compensate for that with tone control. Now let's darken that up a little bit to make it a little bit softer. Another trick I really love with the digital delays age control is finding that kind of crunchy lo-fi sound, darkening it up with the tone control, but then dialing back that attack to kind of really further soften it so it just feels like the tape degrading is just sitting under your signal rather than being an actual like repeat and part of a delay line. So I think it's fair to say that outside of the dual mode, the like properly stereo delay, which I'm always a sucker for, the delay mode on this thing with the most tonal characteristics that I really fall for on this thing is the vintage mode. And it's not just the age control on this thing, which is so good on this mode. I think the way that the repeats kind of overdrive sounds really, really sweet and really, really gentle in a very cool way. But the tone control of the vintage mode basically gives you the ability to switch between an analog delay and a tape delay in terms of kind of the voicing and kind of as the repeats get darker or brighter depending on how you have it set. So we'll start with the tone control pretty much right up the middle, and then we'll roll it to the left for analog delay, and then we'll roll it to the right for tape delay. So here's tone control at noon, no high passing or low passing. And let's roll it a little bit to the left for kind of a subtle analog voice. And then let's roll that way back for a delay that really drops off quickly. So now let's take it just past noon so that you can start to feel that kind of taped characteristic come into the repeats. So now we have that tone control just past noon, which causes it to switch from a low pass filter to a high pass filter and gives it a lot of tape characteristic. And then similar to the analog delay, let's take that way far to the right now, just so you can really hear how kind of like thin and brittle those repeats can get, but in a very kind of melodic and contextually appropriate way. Okay, I'm a huge fan of the character that's implemented into the dual delay mode. I think that in the opening piece, I focused a lot on some of the mono delay lines with stereo modulation that gives it that little bit of like perceived width, because it was really appropriate for the parts I was playing and how I was mixing them in the context of the song that I wrote. However, I often just want that big, wide rhythmic, cool stereo delay field, and this mode has it in spades. So what we're going to do now is take the tone to no roll off, the modulation at totally minimum, and the tape age at totally minimum, and we're going to hear what that bass delay sound is for this mode, and then we'll start kind of dialing up that stuff to kind of build my ideal delay tone for the stereo mode on this thing. So here is the dual delay mode with all of the parameters kind of zeroed out. Okay, now let's darken those up a little bit, add a little bit of that tape age, and introduce just a little bit of modulation. And let's hear how the characteristics of those repeats have changed. There we go. Okay, this is actually a really good opportunity to use the attack control for something else other than the reverse delay, which is my favorite implementation of the attack control. We'll bring the time down to like close to minimum on the delay, and then we'll roll off some of that attack for those delay repeats to create a really, really wide stereo, almost reverb-like rhythmic sound. Okay, I love that. Let's dial back that attack even more and introduce the Mercury 7. Really try to stack some solid ambience here. Okay, and I think a mode like that means it's time to roll into my favorite mode on this thing, which is the reverse delay, which when set nice and dark and warm, with a little bit of that attack rolled off, becomes the coolest droning application in the world. So let's listen to that.